is ending, the sky is falling, and students are striking, depriving themselves of an education because they think they'll be dead in 20 years anyway. I'm Bradley Devlin, and this is The Elephant in the Room. Wherever you may be, however you may be listening, thank you so much for joining us today on this beautiful Thursday because, apparently we don't have many left. We've got like 10 to 20 years worth of Thursdays left, folks. So thank you so much for wasting part of the few Thursdays you have left with us over at The Elephant in the Room with Bradley Devlin. Now, if you haven't already guessed, today's episode is going to be primarily about the campus craziness surrounding the climate strikes occurring on colleges, high schools, and elementary school campuses all over the country. We're going to break down why this is an absolutely evil plot perpetrated by the international left. And when I say the international left, I don't mean your run-of-the-mill Democrat or child activist or European lefty. I'm talking about the leftists in power that are well aware of what needs to be done to effectively combat climate change and how these adults in the intellectual vanguard of the left are exploiting children to consolidate political power for themselves. I'll also touch on why this activism is fraught with problems, and these strikers that are predominantly children, for all their rage and passion, and what I think is these kids' genuine fear that has been created by the adults who, on their face, seem to bow to their rage but are secretly exploiting it, won't actually result in the change that they are searching for. But before we get into all of that, I want to tell you about YAF, the Young America's Foundation, and the incredible opportunities they're offering for students from middle school to college aged. Tonight, September 26th, Margaret Hoover will be speaking at Yale University from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time. This event is 100% free, so if you're in the area, definitely go. Meet some great Republican and conservative activists over at Yale. And if you can't make it, live stream the event from your dorm room, from your couch, on your TV, watch it with friends, watch it with family, do all that. Also, Michael Knowles, the latest victim of cancel culture for saying something factual on Fox News, albeit probably not in the most tactful way, will be speaking at the University of Southern California. Yes, the real USC, sorry, University of South Carolina. Anyway, this will be a free event as well. So USC students, you got to bring your student ID, and non-students must RSVP. And if you're busy tonight, don't worry. YAF has got your back. David French from the National Review and Ordered Liberty podcast will be speaking at Benedictine University tomorrow night for free. So for more information on all of these events, go to www.yaf.org/events to learn more. Also, from October 2nd to the 5th, YAF is hosting its high school conference at the Reagan Ranch. What a beautiful piece of property. You got to go to this. Tuition is $100, but financial aid is available. Again, go to www.yaf.org/events for more information on the website. Our own Taylor Hunt and Danielle Edwards, two of the people who work so hard on not only the lone conservative social media, but also the social media for this podcast, they have both attended this event, and they said that it was amazing, that the ranch provides such an amazing look into one of the great presidents we've ever had in Ronald Reagan, and that YAF's Reagan Ranch is one of the most exciting and worthy investments for young conservative students. So go, sign up. I hope to see you there. Again, that's www.yaf.org/events for more information. Okay, with that done and out of the way, let's get into this episode's segment of campus craziness and talk about the climate strike. Now, as you may already know, students from all over the country, as well as unemployed people in urban areas, decided to take Friday off from their own education or their own joblessness, credible self-owned, to strike for the climate. So according to the Fridays for Future organization headed by Swedish student Greta Thunberg, over 4 million people attended these strikes worldwide last Friday. Obviously, Greta also made remarks at the UN this weekend in an emotional speech telling adults to just do something about climate change. Now, she doesn't necessarily elaborate on what that means, but she's very emotional and upset about the climate stealing her dreams like a Dementor in Harry Potter. So, of course, the left absolutely loves and adores her. Now, first and foremost, I don't mean this segment to be an attack on Greta at all, but I do think it is important to know her background and where she comes from to truly understand the wickedness of the left when it comes to climate change alarmism. So let's talk about who is Greta Thunberg. Well, Greta Thunberg is a 16-year-old Swedish student that is diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome coupled with high-functioning autism, obsessive-compulsive disorder, as well as anxiety and depression. Now, her passion for climate change started in October 2018, when Thunberg started to have anxiety-ridden 3 a.m. nightmares about the impact of global warming on the planet, according to the book Scenes from the Heart, a book she co-authored with her parents. Now, this led to her skipping schools on Fridays to protests all alone at first, on the steps of the Swedish parliament in Stockholm, where she grew up. These Fridays for Future protests caught on, and soon she was joined by hundreds of Swedish children demanding that adults start paying attention to the science when it comes to climate change. So this girl, who has a tragic history of mental illness that nearly incapacitated her and prevented her from leaving her bedroom by her own account, was and is being paraded around Europe, giving speeches at the World Economic Forum, in front of the British Parliament, at the United Nations, and so on. And of course, this is clearly an incredible accomplishment. And it isn't to say that her history of mental illness invalidates her position on climate change. It is to say, however, that the method of treatment, that channeling her clear fear and anxiety for the future, as well as her obsessive tendencies into climate change, while exposing her to situations such as charged debates, rowdy crowds, and organizations of that manner that are known to compound her well-documented problems, doesn't seem like a responsible way of dealing with these conditions. And it also seems to ignore looking out for Greta's long-term interests outside of the world ending because of climate change. So to give you a little taste, here's a clip of Greta's speech to the United Nations.
I should be back in school on the other side of the ocean. Yet you all come to us young people for hope. How dare you?
Tears in her eyes, a lump in her throat, her choice of language, these all show that these are very real convictions. Greta clearly wants to do something about climate change, and she's truly afraid it'll mean the death of her dreams and her literal death if something is not done about it. And here's where I rip on the vanguard of intellectuals from the left. How dare you? How dare you continue to exploit children struck by tragedy? You did it after Parkland, and you're doing it now with Greta and climate change, to forward your political agenda that isn't about solving these problems. And it's not about solving these problems because you've made it abundantly clear by the unworkable, infeasible policy proposals and the capricious demands you're forwarding in the wake of whipping up this doomsday mob. No, it's all about consolidating power and to play off these students and the public's emotions to advocate for full-blown socialism or higher taxes, or to remove wealth from the hands of people you don't like and redistribute it to wealthy people you do like, or poor and working class people to keep them under the thumb of government, is disgusting and despicable and wrong. So with my first dose of scolding out of the way, let's take a look at some of the biggest campus climate strikes that happened on Friday, according to Campus Reform. Students from Rutgers University, joined by surrounding high school and middle school students, marched both on campus and at a local park. Rutgers student activist James Bolin said, "Our leaders at the university and elected officials of this district are very much able to use nice words to say that they're in support of zero carbon emissions, but we don't need nice words. We need adequate action immediately." Well, sorry to break it to you, James. If you were looking for adequate action, you wouldn't be asking for zero carbon emission. You know that's foolish and it's not going to happen in at least the next 100 years, especially with the amount of people being pulled up from poverty thanks to modernization and the use of fossil fuels in developing countries. Regardless, this was a similar story out west. Both San Diego State University and the University of San Diego joined local groups for their Friday walkout, and they were accompanied by 9 local high schools and 1 middle school. Goodness gracious, the left is just trying to get them younger and younger and younger at this point. And it's clear by their use of children to propagate these narratives about gun rights or about climate alarmism. Of course, Yale University has also joined on the call for climate strikes. Freaking Yaleys. My gosh. Can't stand them. I couldn't stand them last time. We did campus craziness last episode. Couldn't stand them there. Give that one a listen to. They learned about what it means to be elite at Yale, and that's a literal class. And I don't know whether it's a check your privilege class or a learn how to exercise your privilege class, but gosh darn Yaleys. Anyway, they're saving their walkout for September 25th, but they have a more specific request for their university: divest from fossil fuel companies in their endowments. And they're not alone in this call. Harvard students, Cornell students, and students from a litany of other universities have called for the divestment of their schools' endowments from fossil fuels, which, for one, is asinine. Okay, for these endowments, oil companies have high free cash flows, they always pay dividends, and right now have relatively stable prices. And the demand for oil products aren't inherently aren't inherently cyclical, making it even better than real estate in some ways because the downside risk is lower on average. But all that aside, sorry, finance nerd a little bit there. All that aside, UC Berkeley students have long called for the divestment of fossil fuels, and to no surprise, they participated heavily in the climate strike on Friday. Faculty, staff, and students at UC Berkeley joined the global climate change protest. According to a news release, faculty members had a 20-minute teach-in, which they just yelled into a microphone and didn't actually learn the science behind climate change. You would think that standing out in the hot sun with some purple-haired activist with a septum piercing yelling at you isn't quite a way to go about learning about climate change. But nevertheless, she persisted. Uh, anyway, they signed a letter to declare a climate emergency, but even UC Berkeley isn't as crazy as this story coming out of the University of Montana. The University of Montana started a week-long climate strike set to run through tomorrow, this Friday. One of the organizers said, "If I really believe the science, I can't in good conscience sit in class and prepare for a future I'm never going to have." Oh, I mean, what a ridiculously idiotic statement from our friend Sarah here. She's one of the organizers of the strike. So you've decided that you're not gonna educate yourselves on the issues facing not only this country, but the world, whether you're studying, the humanities or sciences and engineering, stuff like that, so that you can contribute to finding the solutions that can solve these problems. Instead, you're gonna buck your responsibilities as an adult and shrill and yell into a microphone to tell other people to do something. I mean, it is one of the most immature things to do. It baffles me. It reminds me of my little brother and sister when they'd throw temper tantrums. It is absolutely ridiculous. And it's not only ridiculous because they're not forwarding any sort of mission. They're not initiating any sort of change. They're just complaining. That's what it is. They're just complaining. These aren't climate strikes. They're just climate complaints. They're going to stand out there it's hot in the summer, so they're going to stand out there and they're going to yell, the climate, too hot. We need to change it. We need to change the climate. And then it becomes winter at the University of Montana, and everyone decides to stay in class because they have a heater, because of the benefits of modern technology that have been afforded to us by fossil fuels and by capitalism. Two of the things that you've sworn to tear down if you have your climate justice. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. But it's not only ridiculous, it's really bad activism if they want to see the changes that they purport to want to see. Their organizing capabilities, for one, are incredible. I've already said that. I mean, it's truly quite an accomplishment. According to the Fridays for Future website, this week, more climate strikes are happening than last week. 6,383 events in 170 countries are registered for being part of this week's climate strike on Friday. However, when you fail to attach any concrete policy proposals that are in the least bit feasible, and then shun anyone who disagrees about your methods and refuse to debate the merits of your climate alarmism, you're not enhancing the conversation or moving the ball towards change. In fact, it's quite the opposite. You're creating a rambunctious and increasingly inflamed echo chamber that is restricting the range of rational discourse to actually solve the problem. And you don't need to convince people that are striking alongside you, right? You don't need to convince far-left Democrat to vote for Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. You need to convince the independent to vote for Elizabeth Warren over Trump. It's as simple as that. You need to reach out to the people who are lukewarm on the extent of climate change and hesitant to make the sacrifices in terms of economic growth and quality of life to take ill-defined measures they assume you want to take. You shouldn't castigate them. You got to convince them. And because this is such poor activism that is being organized and controlled by adults, and because these organizations, right, these organizations are larger organizations, they need to be run by adults, they need to be organized by adults, and a lot of times these are professional organizers and activists, and because their activism is so poor, it leads me to believe that the left isn't really concerned about the future of these young people, flat out. I mean, if they were, they wouldn't be telling them to stunt their intellectual growth to make vague and immaterial demands by striking and not going to class on Fridays, right? They wouldn't be taking advantage of the fact that young people don't have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, which makes them much more vulnerable to precisely these types of charged, hyperbolic emotional appeals in order to whip them up into essentially a mob that will vilify and quash any person or political actor that questions their methods or point out that there is a clear lack of any policy proposal or solution. I mean, it is incredibly exploitative, and it isn't meant to serve as a betterment for society or the betterment of the country, and most of all, the betterment of the climate. I mean, it is exclusively for the benefit of consolidating political power, as I said before, and to put these young voters in their pockets for perpetuity so that they can justify any government program, any curtailment of rights for the sake of climate justice. But what will be interesting to see is when these children mature and they realize nothing has been done and that they've been badly duped by the left, what will the backlash be? That's what I'm waiting to see, is what's going to be the backlash when the left doesn't put their money where their mouth is. And you can almost see the left predicting this by setting up really like pseudo-religious practices surrounding environmentalism. I mean, there is sin in the form of pollution and emissions, indulgences in the form of carbon tax credits and offsets, and sainthood in subsidies and emotional speeches, as well as literal confessions. I mean, this literally happened at the UN climate conference over the weekend, that people could confess on how bad of a polluter they were, and they can find repentance in the form of buying into whatever the most extreme suggestion is to fight climate change. 50% reduction in emissions, 100% reduction in emissions, all solar and wind, no nuclear. I mean, these crazy suggestions that won't move the ball forward in the fight for climate justice, as they're calling it now, which I don't even really know what that means. I mean, climate justice. What is really, seriously? I mean, but they're forming community in these crisis support groups and other strange traditions. I mean, they literally hosted a funeral for a glacier this weekend. A funeral for a glacier. All of this religious restructuring, this religious structure around the new environmentalism in order to delay or suppress that backlash, in my opinion. Because if they generate a dogma that is strong enough to create this push and then maintain it, the likelihood of the type of backlash I spoke about before decreases dramatically, because it's going to be perceived with the same contempt as abandoning a faith. They will be perceived as abandoning climate justice, abandoning the fight for climate change if you don't vote the way we want you to for the rest of your life. Okay, so it's time to move on from the climate strikes because I'm trying to make as much of the short time I have left on this livable planet. And also because I want to tell you about the Turning Point USA's annual Student Action Summit on December 19th through the 22nd. It's hosted in Florida, not too far away from Mar-a-Lago. and the current confirmed speakers as of right now are TPUSA founder and president Charlie Kirk, obviously, and former White House press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, with many more great guest speakers to come. In the past, they've had Ben Shapiro, Dennis Prager, Donald Trump Jr., Nikki Haley, so many more. I mean, it's going to be a great event. So go to TPUSA's website, www.tpusa.com/event, for more information, and make sure to apply to attend. Financial aid is available. That brings us to Bradley's breakdown this week. This week, I'm going to be talking about Trump at the United Nations. You know, Greta wasn't the only one there. Of course, President Trump also gave a speech at the United Nations, as presidents do when the United Nations meets in New York. And so, I got to tell you, Trump's speeches to international audiences and his addresses in other countries, it's really his best and most presidential work. I mean, in our own self-obsession as Americans, and especially the media, we focus way too much on the rallies and the Twitter, namely because it's easier to attack each other when we use these types of platforms or formats to say they're emblematic of everything Trump or our political opponent does. I mean, that's what the media did, right? The media loved Barack Obama. Barack Obama had the media in his pocket, and so he would give these giant, long, beautiful, eloquent speeches, and then it would distract away from the absolute garbage foreign policy the Obama administration was running, as well as the deep cultural change that was going on in the country thanks to the Obama administration and the left pushing them forward. For Trump, on the other hand, we're doing the exact opposite. We're focusing too much Again, we're focusing too much on those speeches and those rallies and those tweets and not actually focusing on the good things he's doing. Trump gives this beautiful and eloquent speech about the current political moment. He says that these are times of great contests, high stakes, and clear choices. And he goes on to say that the essential divide is once again thrown into stark relief, the divide between those hungry for power and those who want to only rule themselves. And of course, Trump goes on to highlight America's role in influencing the organization of the globe, predominantly in the post-World War II era and after the end of the Cold War. Now, America has always been a nation that prizes liberty, independence, and self-government above all. And Trump's right to point this out, that because of America's influence, other nations have embraced these same values, these same principles, and put them into action in their governments. And of course, he highlights the US military's role in maintaining this system against those who would try to subvert it, namely Iran and China. And this right here is why so many Americans resonate with Trump, for the exact reasons I laid out above. He doesn't apologize for sticking up for America and how our ideals and actions have shaped this world for the better. I mean, we take so long talking about how he lost the popular vote. Well, he still solidified the vote of 47% of the voting populace. And I guarantee you, not 47% of Americans agree with Trump on everything, or agree that Trump is the most moral, upstanding person who's ever held the office of the presidency. But I do think Americans grew tired of the BP oil spill style "I'm sorry" campaign trotted out by the Obama administration on the international stage. And really, disdain for American values, this disdain for America as an actor on the international stage, is becoming even more evident from the 2020 Democratic presidential primary. It's becoming clear that Obama didn't go far enough for the radical left base with his critique and scorn for America's prior actions. And honestly, as we move closer to 2020, I think the Trump campaign has a massive amount of hurdles to jump over before securing a 2020 victory. And I'm not exactly sure precisely what his chances are of re-election, but it does serve his re-election bid quite well to have a Democratic Party that shows disdain for everyday Americans and everyday American values. Now, I want to take a little time to focus on a part of the speech that I found really, really interesting. And it kind of is this cosmopolitan appeal to nationalism. And I know that seems like an oxymoron at first glance, but it's not. And Trump explains why quite well. And in an interesting turn of events, he explains it quite clearly. He basically says that every nation has a cherished history and a cherished culture that gives that nation purpose and gives that country its uniqueness and value in places like the United Nations. And I think this is a great way for Trump to counter other world leaders' rebuke of Trump making national appeals. And it kind of points out their hypocrisy in a way, these other leaders' hypocrisy, that by being public servants for their countries that seeks their own country's best interests, I mean, we assume so, maybe some of them don't, but we assume so, they too are acting with a sense of nationalism and patriotism. As Trump said, wise leaders put their people and country first, and that's not a bad thing. Being cognizant of your interests in negotiations and being cognizant of your own interests and your country's interests in negotiations leads to an outcome where there's no one being bullied or subverted by the other. And of course, Trump's speech goes on to include the classic Trump words to highlight the achievements of his administration. It's the greatest, the best, the biggest, the hugest. I mean, they're all used here. And he does it to paint a picture of U.S. leadership being pro-freedom and contrast that with China's plan for the world, which is subversion, exploitation, and manipulation. And he highlights China's actions in Hong Kong and how they treat their ethnic and political minorities. And he's right about all of this, specifically about the UN and the WTO needing reform and the injustices and abuses perpetrated by China on the world stage and how normalizing their actions is completely wrong. Then he makes a bit of a blunder. So he goes after outsourcing as evidence of China being a bad trade partner and thus justifying his tariffs. Now, I understand the urgency with which we have to confront China. I mean, anyone worth their political weight at this point understands that problem, but he's flat out wrong with the outsourcing argument. I mean, just flat out wrong. Tariffs on China and bringing back supply chains to the United States Whether or not they're meant to bring back jobs or maintain a wage base will only increase the price of these goods that result in a net loss of resource efficiency and economic growth. I mean, effectively, it works like a subsidy for industries that we clearly don't have a comparative advantage in anymore. But all in all, this is the best version of Trump. Trump doesn't get better than this. Slapping China, slapping Iran, that's sometimes been my biggest problem with Trump. I spoke about this in the last episode with the departure of John Bolton. I get it. You want Trump to be a deal maker, and you want that deal making to come in and him shake hands with Kim Jong-un and denuclearize North Korea and end the Korean War. I mean, I understand all of that. You really thought that that's what he was going to do, but he's not going to do that, especially if that means that deal making comes at the expense of normalizing and humanizing disgusting regimes, especially North Korea, or meeting the Taliban at Camp David, which was almost a reality not 2 weeks ago. I mean, that's unacceptable. That's un-American, and that's beneath not only the office of the presidency, but the United States. And that's why, I completely agree with everything that Trump laid out of the United Nations, but that's why sometimes I have a hard time believing that Trump is going to stick to these enduring conservative principles when he vacillates on whether or not he's going to treat North Korea like an adversary or praise North Korea by telling Kim Jong-un he has the greatest potential for the greatest economy and a great military for himself and things like, no. I'm no more of that. No more of that. And really, if you want to see Trump elected in 2020, we don't want any more of that, and we want more of what we saw at the UN. And it's, even if you love everything that he does, or you just hate the Democrat more, you need more presidential Trump in the lead up to 2020, especially as Democrats get even crazier. All right, it's time for us to move on. But before we do that, I have to tell you young aspiring journalists and opinion writers out there about YAF's NJC program. Since 1977, the National Journalism Center has been training aspiring journalists in the values of responsible, balanced, and accurate reporting. Weekly seminars and on-the-job experience provide participants with the tools to become leaders in combating bias in the mainstream media. Seminars include talks with prominent journalists and public policy experts, writing exercises, training in investigative reporting, audio and video training, and students are also provided with a $1,200 monthly stipend to put towards rent and transportation to their internship. The balance between hands-on experiences and academic training gives students a competitive edge in the workplace after graduation. The vice president of Lone Conservative, Mr. Patrick Hoff himself, had this internship over the summer, and he told me that the NJC internship is a great way for young conservatives to explore the world of DC journalism. He said he was able to report on labor and social issues for the Washington Free Beacon while also getting valuable contacts in the DC area. So if you're a college student interested in conservative media, the NJC internship is the place to be, and he highly recommends the program. I do as well. I applied for that internship, ended up going to Heritage, but still love the folks over at NJC, and that's why the spring 2020 application is now open, and you should apply at njc.yaf.org, and the internship will run from January 21st to April 10th. So keep an eye out for that. Also, keep an eye out for the summer applications that are opening soon. Speaking of great student journalists and writers, it is time for Howl About That, the segment where we take an outstanding lone conservative author and piece and shout out their great work and dive into their analysis a little bit more. So this week, we will be highlighting Kyle Moran's piece titled "The GOP Must Champion a Post-Brexit Free Trade Deal." As you may know, the United Kingdom is set to leave the European Union on October 31st, and it's uncertain whether or not Prime Minister Boris Johnson will be able to renegotiate an exit deal before that deadline. And if they don't renegotiate an exit deal before that deadline, they exit with no deal. And there's a litany of problems associated with a no deal scenario, not just because of the implementation of tariffs from the continental market it's no longer a part of, but also highlighting the issues of what they call the Irish backstop, which is the border between Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, and the Republic of Ireland. That being said, maintaining free trade with the European states is obviously ideal for the UK. And Moran points this out. Last year, the EU accounted for 46% of all UK exports, 54% of all UK imports, and 7 of the UK's 10 largest export markets and sources of imports were from the other EU nations. Now, obviously, the UK should leverage its position to the best of its abilities to get these concessions, but a no-deal Brexit is not preferable to a renegotiated one that respects the UK as a trusted and vital trading partner, especially as the German economy continues to enter recession and France, Spain, Italy, other core EU countries continue to inch along in terms of economic growth. So, in my mind, here's what the ideal free trade agreement looks like between the US and the UK. First, even though tariffs between the US and the UK are low, they can be lowered even further, ideally to zero. Sadly, what you see in most trade agreements, which becomes abundantly clear when you look into the European Union's trade deals over the course of its evolution, specifically the Single European Act of 1985, is that these free trade deals, and I'm using air quotes, but you can't see me because this is a podcast, that these free trade deals try to control and micromanage trade rather than liberalize it. Second, the UK is an ideal partner for this type of agreement in the first place. It has an advanced economy that is already integrated in many ways with ours, especially in the financial markets. We also share many political and legal traditions, both being common law countries, and this makes our systems very compatible, which means we're also able to adopt mutual recognition of each other's regulatory regimes. Essentially, this means that if a good is checked off by the UK regulations, then it ought to be good enough for the United States and vice versa. I mean, this would streamline inspections. I can't even tell you how much money we'd save. We keep playing this game where we don't have mutual recognition in advanced countries' regulations that oftentimes have harder regulations than ours, even though our administrative state is huge. I mean, if you look at France and Germany, I mean, it is very, very Byzantine. But it would save us a lot of money, especially when we talk about, automobiles, drugs, food products, and things of that nature that will save us money in the long run, save both countries money in the long run, and make the free market much more efficient. Now, the United States already has free trade agreements with diverse nations, including Jordan, Australia, and Colombia. And for 46 years, we haven't been able to have a free trade agreement with the UK because the European Union has impeded on those bilateral organizations. Because what happens when you enter the European Union is you forfeit control of your foreign trade relations to Brussels, which I believe, I mean, it's absolutely idiotic, in my opinion. The idea that, really the Thomas Paine argument, why would such a small island across the sea manage the affairs of 13 large colonies? I mean, it's exactly the same thing. Why would a small city located in Belgium be determining the regulations and the foreign affairs of the British economy? I mean, it is that foolish. If you are a good writer like my friend Kyle Moran and you want to get involved at Lone Conservative, visit www.loneconservative.com. Go to the top menu bar, click join. It'll tell you how to apply so that you might have the chance to publish for Lone Conservative or even be featured on this segment of the show. How about that? Also, we have the best merchandise at Lone Conservative. The best words for the best merchandise, I promise you. I mean, it is officially the middle of tailgate season, and we've got Lone Conservative Justice Brett Kavanaugh I Like Beer koozies. So make sure you check those bad boys out after you apply to write for Lone Conservative in our shop. Support Lone Conservative, the things we do, like our great writing, and of course, this very podcast. That brings us to our final segment of the week. I know, 2 episodes down almost. It's gone by quick, but it is time for the Warrior of the Week segment. And this week, we're going to recognize someone that I actually know. Her name is Amy Swearer. Amy Swearer is a senior legal policy analyst at the Heritage Foundation. She specializes in the Second Amendment gun legislation and, of course, our right to self-defense on a more broader philosophical level. So yesterday, the House Judiciary Committee under Chairman Jerry Nadler held a hearing called Protecting America from Assault Weapons, really to just shame everyday Americans for exercising their Second Amendment right for the purposes of survival in the form of hunting or or self-defense, and blame them for the evil acts of deranged individuals from Dayton and El Paso and Parkland and so on. And, Amy was there to combat this narrative. And honestly, I think this is one of the best testimonies I've ever heard in an issue-based congressional hearing. So here's a little taste of what that sounded like.
Fortunately, too many policymakers appear completely uninformed about basic factual realities related to guns and gun violence.
So congratulations, Amy, on a job well done there. Keep up your fantastic research over at the Heritage Foundation. I mean, we even had someone else lined up to take this segment, and I saw this testimony yesterday and tweeted about it. I mean, her testimony just blew up, man. So since it was a little time sensitive, we decided to recognize her this week. So congratulations one more time. Keep doing what you're doing. We love seeing our Second Amendment rights upheld not only in the halls of Congress, but also all of the research that you guys put into it. So we really, really appreciate that. Well, that does it for us on this episode of The Elephant in the Room with Bradley Devlin. So make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Spotify, SoundCloud, and wherever else you may find us. Support us at loneconservative.com. We will see you next time. The Elephant in the Room with Bradley Devlin is a Lone Conservative production, produced by Patricia Patnode, audio edited by Jeffrey Tomlin, production assistants Sarah Bettingfield and Samantha Kamen, social media coordination by Taylor Hunt and Jeffrey Johnson, music by Braden Shaw.